Hey everybody, welcome back to Video So taking another fun and exciting episode of you guys this evening because recently we've been talking about the Majora's Mask Nintendo 64 static recompilation project, so I figured I'd take a look at another game that's seen vast improvements on PCs from Nintendo 64 source hardware, and that is going to be the Perfect Dark Decompilation project. Now, the maker of this has a username that's impossible to pronounce, so I will put it in the description below. It is a collection of letters, but I want to make sure they get credit. Now, this is different than the static recompilation, but it's trying to achieve the same result. And if you can't tell already, this looks and is running at a faster frame rate than Perfect Dark ever could on the real Nintendo 64 hardware, or even on the MiSTer FPGA Turbo Core. This is decompiled and then recompiled for new target hardware, so you're able to have all of these quality of life improvements and vast visual improvements as well. You're getting full mouse aiming, whether you use a mouse or a second analog stick, and this is just an incredible way to play Perfect Dark. And it seems like decompilations and recompilations for Nintendo 64 are gaining a ton of traction in 2024. It's been going on for some years now, but it seems like in the popular zeitgeist, this is now a huge topic that people really want to talk about. And if you play Perfect Dark on real Nintendo 64 hardware, you can still have fun, but it can be an absolute slideshow in spots. Now, of course, there is a remaster of the game, so there's more than one way to play, but this takes the original Perfect Dark files for Nintendo 64, decompiles them, and then rebuilds them for new target hardware. So this is a one-to-one, byte-to-byte match of what you'd be playing on Nintendo 64, just recompiled for new target hardware, and the improvements are huge. Just take a look at this gunfight here. You have 5-6 enemies running in at once, and in the original game on real hardware, this would literally run at like 8 to 10 frames per second. Back in the 90s and 2000s early, we didn't mind that so much, but today it can be very difficult to go back to a game like Perfect Dark on real hardware and not struggle with it, especially in the control department. When the frame rate tanks, it's very hard to aim even with the assisted aiming on. Now, compared to Zelda 64, the Majora's Mask recompilation, there aren't as many options in here. Basically, all the controls are mapped for you. You run the executable and you're just playing the games. There isn't that large host of over-the-top options, but what we get here just works, and it allows you to play Perfect Dark, again, the original Nintendo 64 version, on new modern hardware, whether it's Windows or Linux-based. And if you've never played Perfect Dark before, it's been some years since you played it, you definitely have to check it out again. It is one of the best first-person shooters of all time, of its era, in my opinion. And as we walk through Chicago here, the city I live in, I can tell you it looks nothing like this, but honestly, this looks nothing like the Nintendo 64 original either. All of the texture work is clearer, all of the models are clearer, the internal rendering resolution has been bumped up, and we're getting an absolute rock-solid frame rate out of Perfect Dark, which is something you absolutely could not say about the Nintendo 64 original. Even on MiSTer FPGA with the Turbo Core with a patched version of the game, you cannot hit a lock 60 frames per second. You can get close, but you're not going to have the level of graphical enhancements along for the ride. And this is going to be across the entire game, whether you're in enclosed rooms or in these big open areas. You're just going to get a flawlessly smooth experience when you're playing Perfect Dark. And then you add in the dual analog controls, all of those quality of life improvements, and you just have a game that somehow feels both ultra modern as well as retro at the same time. And I love this open area here. Always gives me original Black Mesa Half-Life vibes. But this is just what's so much fun about the modding community in Nintendo 64 lately. This project's been going on longer than something like the static recompilation on Majora's Mask, but it was just recently updated with some minor enhancements like a week and a half to 2 weeks ago per GitHub, and I figured since you guys were really into Majora's Mask recompilation, you might not know about Perfect Dark either. But again, as we just run around, this game has enough geometry to feel modern enough. This feels like it's hitting the same era as stuff like Half-Life and those other 3D games, and that is what I love. This is a nostalgic look married to a modern environment in which you can get all of these new control schemes, you can get lock 60 frames per second, and you can get a huge internal rendering resolution bump, making this look like a remastered version of the game, even if it uses the original files and the rebuilt source code. And I will say that the audio has seen an improvement as well. Go ahead and listen for 45 seconds, and I'll come back with a lot more Perfect Dark that runs a lot better.
Huh? What?
I'll get sighted.
Audio quality on the recompilation just sounds spectacular. It is definitely clearer than you're getting on Nintendo 64. Part of that's just coming down to the digital-to-digital implementation, but part of it's coming down to just improvements in how this is done. And there's so many fun visual effects in Perfect Dark as well. When you use your spy camera here, you get this fun fisheye effect with these pseudo scan lines up on the screen, and this just looks incredible as well. The biggest thing about Perfect Dark in Nintendo 64 is that the resolution was quite low, and because of the texture cache being so small on Nintendo 64 hardware, you absolutely got those super blurry textures that sometimes would be very hard to make out. As we walk around the second level of Perfect Dark here, you absolutely know exactly what you're looking at whenever you are looking at it. So you're getting more detail in the textures and you're getting more detail in the environment, helping sell the overall world building and vibe of something like Perfect Dark. And I just love how smooth it is to move the camera with a second analog stick, and just how many frames you have per second when you're actually moving the camera, because honestly in spots Perfect Dark can be so slow. I've heard people describe it as giving them a little bit of motion sickness. That's never happened to me personally, but when I was doing the MiSTer FPGA test, some people said that footage in the game could give them a little nausea, and I totally understand that's something you don't want in your gaming experience. And big open areas like we're coming up into now with 2 or 3 enemies, this would just basically bring the actual original game down to like 12 frames per second, which even for back then was a little bit too slow. We're absolutely maximize the graphical fidelity of what the Nintendo 64 could offer over frame rates. They wanted a pretty game, not a fast game, but now with this decompilation and rebuild, you can have both at the same time. You can have a pretty game for its era, and you can also have a locked 60 frames per second experience, and that is just the best of both worlds. And I can't wait to see what the back half of 2024 has to offer when it comes to these decompilation projects, as well as the static recompilation, because I think Nintendo 64 is going to see a huge boom in developments. We're going to be playing a lot of the library in games that look like this, not like original hardware. And in conjunction, we have the MiSTer FPGA core as well, which gives you the original experience on non-target hardware. 2024, at least the back half, I bet is going to be the year of Nintendo 64, because people are still nostalgic for this hardware, and being able to see this cutscene here in so much more detail and in so many more frames per second, even the bottom of the shoes, that little tread texture there, reads so well on camera, where on real hardware it basically just looked like a blurry, smeary mess, and you were never really able to tell whether or not that was shoe texture or just absolute crap. I'm not knocking Rare. Perfect Dark on Nintendo 64 was a very big technical accomplishment. It was just pushing at the seams of the hardware, and maybe should have been held over to be a launch game for the GameCube. But even in this area, all of the doors, all of the animations, they just look so fluid, and you're getting a few more frames of animation as well in the character animation, so things don't feel as stilted. When the enemies move around, they feel more like humans and less like marionettes or some other sort of AI in the game. That was one of my biggest complaints about Perfect Dark back in the day. Everything moved with so few frames of animation that it really didn't sell the illusion of when an enemy was ragdolling down to the ground after you shot him, that you in fact had killed him. Now today it just 100% works, and that is absolutely incredible. But tell me down below, were you aware of this decompilation? Have you played it, or are you finding it out from the video? And if you haven't played it, I can't recommend it enough. Even if you played Perfect Dark recently, go through this version of the project. I'll leave a link to the GitHub below. You're going to have an awesome time, and it's down to dedicated fans and modders that are giving us experiences like this. It's not like there's not other ways to play Perfect Dark, but somebody loves the game enough, they wanted to get under the hood, start tinkering around, decompile the game, and then recompile it for us all to enjoy, and that's always to be celebrated. If you want to see more of these Nintendo 64 decompilation mods, leave me a comment down below. There's not a ton out right now, but there's still a few, so if this video does well, it's definitely a topic I'll still talk about, and we'll definitely follow up with the updates to Majora's Mask as well. But yeah, Perfect Dark, higher resolution, 60 frames per second, dual analog controls. It has every creature comfort and quality of life improvement you would want, married to a game that is still one of the best thing Rare's ever made. But short of that, we are done. Go play this version of Perfect Dark, and I will see you guys next time with more frames. Bye-bye.